Hello, today is July 3rd, 2019. This is the Cluster API Office Hours, subproject of SIG Cluster Lifecycle. As always, we have a code of conduct policy, which basically boils down to don't be a jerk. We have agenda here. If folks want to add their deets to the meeting notes, that would be highly useful. Also, if you have things that you would like to discuss, feel free to add an agenda item here. Without further ado, we can get started here. Jason, you are the first one up with follow-up with AWS accounts for testing.
Yes, a while back we ended up disabling the janitor for the cluster API tests because we found out that the 10, what we thought were AWS accounts were just 10 different AWS credentials in the same account as the COPS account. I know Justin was looking into this a while back, and I just wanted to kind of follow up to see where that was.
I have tracked it down. I need to, or I or anyone needs to basically PR a request. The blocker is we need a Google group. This is under working group Kate's Infra. I need to PR a request in to create said group, and then it should be created. And then we should be able to create the sub-accounts by a means to be determined. But the first step was the email. Actually, I think I can do that. I can create the sub-accounts. They gave me temporary permission, so, but we do need the email, so. That is next on my list of chasing herding cats.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Justin, if you need me to do anything internally, just hit me up on Slack and I'll expedite.
Thank you. I do think that you don't have to turn it off, right? We just had to turn off the janitor, but we had to turn off like one of the janitors, but there's nothing wrong with you continuing to run your tests, right?
Yeah, the issue is that I think we're hitting a couple of places right now where we're getting intermittent issues if we have two tests run between the intermittent janitor runs that are running today. And we're looking at expanding the testing as well, which is only going to potentially cause more issues there. So.
Okay, yeah, I'll work on it.
The next item I had is we have a PR request to add Andy to the maintainers list, which aligns with the permissions that he already has in the Kubernetes org repo. And, I think this has been open for a few days now. So please take a look, provide any feedback. And we also do want to definitely look at promoting additional contributors as well. And I know it's Andrew, right, from New Relic, had some. Yep. You were going to be able to speak to what type of level of contribution your team can have upcoming.
Yeah. Would you like me to do that now, I guess? Yeah, so Seth and I on my team here at New Relic have been working mostly in the Kappa space so far, with some smaller contributions to the cluster API upstream. As the kind of V1 Alpha 2 architecture starts becoming a little bit more of a reality and that code comes in, I think our involvement at the cluster API level will likely increase, especially with the Bootstrap provider stuff. A few months ago, we had expressed some kind of soft requirements for being able to use more Ignition style bootstrapping, and in discussing a lot of the Bootstrap provider proposal, discussing with Vince and others, the Bootstrapper area is kind of a spot where that work may be able to come into play. So there's myself and Seth, who you've seen PRs from. There is Mark, who usually can't make this call because he's in Barcelona. And then we have Matt on my team, is pretty much the CoreOS expert. So I think all of us are probably going to get more involved within the next couple of weeks, next couple of months. Numbers are hard, but I said for myself, like easily 6 to 8 hours a week. If it's more relevant to the stuff that my team's looking at, maybe more than that. We factor this stuff into our planning as a team, so it's generally pretty flexible.
Right. I think TLDR, please go to that issue. In general, we should be doing this as a thunk, not a one-off. Like every cycle, we should do the promotion policy, which is standard for SIG cluster lifecycle. We go through this pretty regularly, and we talked about it even yesterday, where we go through at the end of any cycle, we do the munging and demoting too as well. So like if somebody's not active and they're in the approvers list or the reviewers list, ask them if they still want to do that or if they have time to do it, because it's an ongoing maintenance thing. So please put your comments in that PR if you're interested in helping out. You have committed and are intending to commit. That's key. So for some people who are new and haven't actually fully committed, we might ask to try to go through a cycle and commit to the help wanted issues, and we'll try to actively promote folks next cycle too as well.
So before we move on to the next topic, I had a follow-up on the first agenda item that we discussed. Are those accounts just for testing, or is it also available for community contributors to use?
So those accounts are for testing accounts.
Okay.
It looks like Andrew has his hand raised.
Yes, hi. This is a bit of a tangent, but I was wondering, Andrew, from New Relic, if the Bootstrap provider proposal seems to support Ignition or not, and how you feel about that.
Oh, that might be loaded. We think it does. So we think it does because a couple of assumptions we made about that proposal were that the Bootstrapper's output would just be the configuration that, let's say in the case of AWS, would become like user data or what have you. That is currently in alignment with the pattern that we use to administer Ignition for CoreOS. So there's no code for this. So like it's pretty hard to, I guess, think about it.
Yeah, I didn't mean for that to be a loaded question. Basically, it
Yeah.
boils down to, is your artifact one text file? And if it is, then I think it does.
Yeah,
So
it is. It is.
on that. So
Yeah.
All right. Awesome.
All right. Moving along. Vince, externalized cluster spec. Cluster provide spec. That looks like a misformed sentence.
Yeah, so this was an issue initially opened by Pablo like a few months ago, and it was pretty much like to remove provider spec and provider status from the cluster as well, the same as we did like for the machine. I wanted to push this a little bit more forward. Not sure if Pablo's on the call, but if there are any updates or like thoughts around this.
I'm here. Briefly, as a comment to you over the Slack conversation is that if you look at the comment from Andy, he suggested an action plan that I thought it was makes sense. It would basically, I suggested to do in steps. The first step was just to take the existing embedded spec and just make a reference to an external COD. And that takes me without any changes, just changing the actual field for an object reference. As I mentioned, this is pretty simple. I wanted to test it somehow, but I was looking for a provider to test it. And neither the test provider, the one we use in the test, nor the CAT, the Docker provider that Chuck is developing, actually use the specs. So I can make the change because it's that simple about how to test it. And how I want to mostly to try to figure out what is the impact in the existing provider. So that's more or less the situation.
Got it. So do you think like do you have time to like actually work on the proposal? I think also Andy has expressed interest in helping in that direction.
Yeah. I mean, you mean the proposal? The proposal is what it is. I mean, I don't really know what you. The proposal is that simple, just to change the field. I just expected a cap for that.
Yeah. So like,
Okay.
so that's what we kind of discussed in the issue like a while ago. So if we open like a simple cap, which is like scoped on like just changing provider spec to have its own external CRD and nothing else, I think it would be very small and simple that like we can actually push it through relatively easy.
Okay.
And Andy, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. Okay. Maybe my confusion was I was thinking that you want a pull request, not a cap for the change, but actually like saying a proof. I say that's what it looks like. Okay, but that's fine. Makes sense. Do it.
Andy.
So Pablo, do you think you'll have time to write this up as a cap?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Any rough idea about how long you think it'll take to get something put together?
No, really. To be honest, I mean the cap is not going to be much different from what's already in the issue. If you look at the description, initial description of the issue, there is a text. I just will look at other caps to try to use the same format, but regarding content, I don't have much to add to that.
Okay, awesome. I look forward to seeing that. Thanks.
Okay. Next up, Vince, Cluster API Provider Version Management. This is the one.
Yeah, so this is something that, yeah, you opened up and we were briefly chatting at yesterday's SIG meeting. So in general, like we have a version skew, we can say, like between Cluster API and providers. And now that we're also going to split into infrastructure providers and Bootstrap providers, the matrix of, compatibility matrix will be even harder to understand for users. I don't have any proposal in this. I would like to hear like if other folks here have like any ideas on like how we could structure our versioning so that like it kind of makes sense across providers and like a user can say, oh, I can use this version with these other two and I'm not going to have issues.
So I'm actually going to say that instead of bike shedding in this meeting, it should be more of a PSA if you have thoughts or ideas to rally on that issue. And then maybe once we have more distilled feedback, we can actually talk about it, talk about that issue with some concrete set of action items.
Sounds good.
So if you care about versioning, which everybody who's using this should, and you have thoughts there, please try to distill down your thoughts and we'll try to, maybe by next meeting, we can have a more focused discussion with regards to that topic. You're up next again too.
Okay, I have the next two items. So for V1 Alpha 2, so quick status update first. We have merged the types. We changed the domain to cluster.6.k8s.io. TBD if that's actually going to stay or it's going to go back to cluster.k8s.io. I guess like we'll find an answer like in the coming days. There was this PR up which had like a lot of comments, and I was hoping that we could like either solve them or like close the PR if like we want to keep these fields. This is removing addresses and and conditions from machine.status, which as far as I know, they're not like really used, especially conditions. And in V1 Alpha 2, addresses should move to the infrastructure provider if there is a need for it. Comments, questions, concerns?
So I understand the rationale for addresses. I'm not sure about conditions. Has somebody audited all of the existing providers to make sure they don't make use of that field?
Yeah, I quickly checked like the Cluster API code base and GCP, Azure, and AWS. I haven't checked vSphere.
CapV uses it.
Conditions.
Oh, sorry, addresses. I don't know about conditions.
Okay, so I think we should think about them separately. My concern with conditions is we talked about this for weeks previously. And the PR doesn't have a lot of justification for why we should change things. And I'm not sure that the people involved now, or many of the people that are active now, were actually aware of the previous discussions. So that was the main reason I brought it up. I don't feel strongly about keeping it if no one's using it. It seems like a no-brainer. But I do know that Gardner does use this. And the reason given before was that we wanted to not have a coupling between machine set and the node resources. So, yeah, I don't know. I think this is something we might want to also discuss at Justin's later topic on API review.
Yeah.
But this PR, again, I mean, it removes 2 fields. It doesn't change functionality, at least for anyone that was on V1 Alpha 1. So I don't feel strongly about removing it. I also don't feel like it does anything.
Typically, for one of the things we're not doing, which I think we should absolutely do, is this is like a change that would absolutely require a release note if you're changing fields, right? So one of the things that I think would be worthwhile for us to go forwards with is, even if we don't have all the provider information currently listed here, we should do equivalent parity. So when we actually create a release, that we roll up the information of what API changes existed and what things would be breaking changes for downstream providers. This would totally be if they're using it, would be a breaking change, right? So, so I think that's one concrete actionable feedback I have. And I guess the other concrete actionable feedback would be to try and maybe do a little bit more history diving, and maybe David, you can link to the issues or something before we make a final call on this particular one.
Yes, I did that in this issue, and I'll try doing that going forward.
Are there any other comments there? I don't know what the impacts would be across providers that we don't have visibility to.
Michael's got his hand up.
I see that. I was going to say, Michael.
Yes, I know we're using addresses in some form to record like internal host names and stuff as part of our provisioning workflow. So if we remove this, I'm not entirely sure if we're using this exact field offhand, but we'll have to account for that one way or the other.
So, well, I can follow up on the issue, but 2 things is, the first one is like this only applies to V1 Alpha 2. V1 Alpha 1 is unchanged, so there is no breaking change there. And for V1 Alpha 2, the address field will most likely move to the infrastructure provider. There is no hard requirement yet, but we can make one if there is a need for it. For conditions, and I saw the history of conditions, and it seems like they were added for the machine so that we can copy from the node object, because at the time there was not a really good way to actually query the node. Given that we now have remote node references and the support for remote clients, I think it's completely fine to actually go check and query the node and not duplicate health information across machine and nodes.
Right. Andy has his hand raised, then Daniel.
So I think the biggest thing that I'm interested in, and one of the reasons that I suggested removing these to Vince, was that when I first started looking at the API for Cluster API, I realized there's a lot of fields that the Cluster API repository has no code that it does anything with. And that was confusing to me as a newcomer to the project. And so if we decided that we wanted to keep these or any other fields that Cluster API itself doesn't touch, then I would strongly encourage us, as part of all of the effort that we're doing, to create conformance tests that make it so that providers have to fill in these fields because they are there for a reason. And if they are used by some providers and not used by other providers, then they must be optional and documented as such. But the fact that there's fields on there that like may or may not be used or processed is a concern to me.
I think general documentation of fields is totally an actionable good thing that we should be doing. When and why and where. Daniel?
I recall in the V1 Alpha 2 machine proposal that there were comments about, so the initial proposal talked about phases in the machine object, and then there were comments saying that we should be using the conditions conventions. That's what's recommended, and that's what's used in in core Kubernetes APIs. And so yeah, I'm a little confused. Why are we removing conditions if it's something? So it may not be part of that proposal, might not be implemented right now, but it's. I thought it was in the discussions on that PR that that was going to be where we were going, using conditions and having the machine controller update conditions on the machine object as a way to to indicate where in the, let's say, the bootstrap process or the infra process where that machine is.
I kind of agree there. David, you're next.
I wanted to suggest, I haven't heard any, so first to Andy's point earlier, I think the reason a lot of the fields were in the spec but not used is because we used to externalize all of the provider spec, right? And provider controllers were supposed to fill those fields in, and definitely we lack conformance tests. I think we have some documentation. So far, I haven't heard any objections to removing addresses, and I think that makes a lot of sense as being part of the infrastructure provider. And then secondly, I would prefer to keep conditions unless there is strong objections. But again, this is just changing a type. We're not aware of any downstream users, so I don't think we should spend a lot of time thinking about it.
Okay, I want to give Michael a last chance to talk, but then after this, I think we should table the discussion to put comments on the issue. I would put a hold on the issue, this particular one, until next week, and then we can make a final resolution once people have had their comments.
Okay, I would say I've confirmed we are using that addresses field, and my overall concern is if we remove this information from the machine, then we're now changing for external components the source of truth to a different place. And for instance, like if the Bootstrap controller has to do something with these address fields, it has to look up the machine and then look up the infrastructure object. And so I think it's getting a little bit muddy about what information is supposed to live where.
That's fair. I think / hold the issue for a week, puts your comments in. I have comments about conditions in particular. If you have comments about the machine addresses, please add the details there. And if anything, even if the fields are not removed, we should do the second half of what Andy probably said, which is have better documentation of where they're used and why, and if it makes sense for the time being. So why don't we hold the PR for now, put comments on the PR if you have them, and we'll move on to the next item. Does that seem fair?
Sounds good to me.
Cool. Vince, next up, code walkthrough in the coming weeks.
Yeah, so there was some interest in having like another code walkthrough for V1 Alpha 2. So I wanted to just like put this out there, like if you're interested, and then you would like to dedicate the time again for like on Tuesday, we can do a code walkthrough for V1 Alpha 2 before the end of the month when we're in a better shape. And I think this kind of benefit the community and new contributors.
All right. Any questions there? Andy, you're next.
So we are interested in trying to organize a hopefully 2-day face-to-face community meeting, maybe in September sometime. It would be shortly after we get V1 Alpha 2 released, if the timing goes well. And we would want to use this time to talk about V1 Alpha 3 designs and proposals. So just wanted to bring this up. I realize that this is the day before a US holiday, so there might not be everybody here. So we'll probably mention this again next week. But if you're interested and would be available sometime in September, we'll probably put together some sort of poll for both dates and locations. So I just wanted to mention this to get this on everybody's minds.
So the action item is that you're going to re-announce it again next week, and then, or are you going to send out an email to the mailing list?
I'll probably do both.
Okay.
And do we vote on the location?
I think we'd certainly be interested in hearing from the community what area or areas are most favorable. So Bahamas would be nice, but but yeah, I know like we have fairly easy access, I think, to some space in both Palo Alto and Seattle or Bellevue. But if there's other people who'd be interested in hosting, we certainly can talk about that as well. I'm guessing we'll probably have like, I don't know, 20 to 30 people depending on availability, maybe more if there's more interest. So we just need to kind of keep the size in mind as well.
Right. I think we should probably wait for the email and then maybe take it there. And then folks who have ideas or thoughts, please comment on the email, and then we can reconvene again next week and discuss it in more detail, perhaps with more concrete logistics. Apparently Bahamas is the winner already, so we'll we'll see everyone there. Next up, just a PSA that ACE had a proposal. I didn't know how many people would be here today. There's actually quite a few, which I'm a little surprised by before a US holiday. But if folks could review that and have comments, hopefully we can discuss them next week. So it's just a PSA. Next up was David, doc maintenance.
This is probably ill-named. So for the next couple weeks, I'm not going to be able to focus on Cluster API. So that's sort of just a PSA. I mention it because right now I've been doing most of the doc maintenance, and people kind of instinctively assign doc tasks to me, which is totally fair. But I'd just like everyone to be aware that I'm going to be kind of out of pocket for the next few weeks. And if anyone is interested in contributing, in particular by reviewing doc updates, help is needed there, and that would be appreciated.
I can help, and I think it would be great if we can schedule like a session to just like hand off like any technical details.
I would love to see new contributors here too.
Yeah,
Docs is a great way for people to get engaged.
I can help there too.
Who is I?
Is Ashish, sorry.
Right, that's right.
I can put my name down. And I think Andy also says in the chat that he's happy to jump on the docs.
That was Jason. Oh, are you talking about
Andy?
I'm Andrew. We can keep that distinction.
Andrew, okay, sorry. We have 3 Andys or whatever.
No Andys, unless my mom's in this meeting somewhere.
So if you're interested in helping the docs, please feel free to add your name to the meeting notes. The meeting notes are open, and before folks do a handoff or whatever, to make sure that there's some timeout. So if other people are interested or just quiet right now, they can add themselves to the meeting notes and get involved.
Sounds great. Thank you, Tim.
Next up, Ashish.
So yeah, I wanted to see if we are going to have like a talk or a presentation at KubeCon NA 2019, and if so, do we have any details on, like, I know there was a deep dive planned. Is that still on the plan? And what information or what details are on the deep dive? Just to make sure that people giving general talks on cluster API kind of steer clear of that and there is no overlap. So I just wanted to kind of hear what you all think.
Well, deep dive is community facing. There's like different tracks, right? So the developer facing track, especially for KubeCon North America, by that time should probably be talking about V1 Alpha 3 timeframe and release and the details associated with that.
So what sessions do we already have planned? Like planned in the sense, we know we are going to have sessions, but the details may not be in yet.
So from a SIG perspective, there's only one deep dive for Cluster API.
Okay.
And there can be only one. So I think the second part of your question is logistics. With regards to how we pick the set of presenters, I think we should probably have someone who hasn't presented but is like in the known list, and somebody else who wants to present who's willing to come up the ladder. So if you are interested in talking, very similar to how we did this. Hold on, wrong window. If you're interested in talking, please add your deets here, and we'll collect that list, and then SIG Cluster Lifecycle will have to figure out how we arbitrate the people who want to talk in this particular one. Obviously, if you want to submit a separate talk that's user-facing, that's not on the developer track, then you're free to do so at any time.
Okay, so the deets here is just if you're interested or not.
Yep.
Okay.
So same thing, doc is open, so feel free to add your name there. Next up, Justin, requesting an API review.
Yes. So this is sort of in general, like what came out of the discussion of whether our API group should be SIG cluster.sigs.k8s.io or cluster.k8s.io is that my understanding is that being in sigs.k8s.io does not necessarily free us from the need for an API review. Being in k8s.io may or may not require us to have an API review. It doesn't seem like it's. I was just wondering whether we should actually request the API review formally and go through that formal process. It seems like it's certainly something that we iterate on, and having input from the stewards of Kubernetes APIs, self-appointed stewards of Kubernetes APIs may be valuable. And I've, full disclosure, I put it in for the other projects that I'm involved in that I am a sort of primary owner on. But I didn't feel like I could just make an arbitrary decision here.
I know Jason has raised his hand, but I want to talk on this one in particular because there's governance problems with this currently. So I'm totally cool with the idea of going through an API review, but I also want it to be quote unquote non-binding. So if there are decisions we need to make, I don't want it to hamper us, but I also don't want it to be a formal procedure that is required for things that are outside of the core. That seems arbitrary, especially given the governance, right? So I'm going to talk with both SIGARC and steering on this and follow up on what setting case law, right? Because we need to do that. Now, with that context in mind, I'll hand it off to Jason.
Yeah, so I think the big issue that we worry about right now is blocking any and all API changes as we're iterating on these early alphas on API reviews, because it's a small group of contributors that are already overwhelmed. We've already done several informal API reviews with some of the API reviewers. And I think once we get to a more stabilized version, when we're ready to start getting into betas, then I think it'll be more proper to, completely block progress on iterating the API on the formal API reviews. It just seems very heavyweight, especially since all of the proposals that we generally work on now, while we think we're, accounting for all of the things that we need to do for that milestone, I suspect that by the time we get to actually shipping V1 Alpha 2, we're going to have to tweak what we already have in the proposal for that final bid as we try to get everything wired back together.
I think it's Vince, then David, then Justin.
So I would love like an API review, as like others have mentioned. I really would like to wait until like we are like more mature, really early right now, like to have like a full review, or as Tim mentioned like before, like kind of like it being non-descriptive as well. Like we welcome feedback at any point. One thing that I wanted to mention, like if and this is one question to Justin, is like, is this like related to changing back to K8s.io? And if so, like I would be +1 to that, because I don't really like the idea of like exposing 6.K8s.io, because that gives nothing to users. But if we are like kind of going back and forth between this discussion, like I'm completely fine keeping it as it is.
Yeah, but there's governance problems here, so it goes beyond the just the naming. But let's go into the next one, which is David, then Justin.
I just wanted to say that I think we definitely should have an API review. I concur with Jason and Vince that we probably want to wait because, and this is the last important point, I don't think we would pass an API review now. I'm actually curious who had informal reviews, and if anyone like Daniel Smith, Jordan Liggett, any of those guys reviewed it, because I don't think we'd pass right now.
To give concrete feedback, we talked with Clayton Hawkins. Next up, Justin.
Yeah, thank you. So I agree with I think what everyone has said. My feel is we do have to figure out these governance things. As a point of order, I don't think 6.K8s.io, K8s.io actually, from the current rules, which are obviously subject to change, like impacts this at all, or this doesn't impact the name. I don't think we will pass. I agree that we likely wouldn't. First of all, I don't think it should be pass-fail. But I also think that if we want to be in a place where the API review is like a happy outcome, we need to like API review early and often, and we also need to establish a expectation of the API review team that they have to get their turnaround time down to less than a week, because we're not going to wait for it to add a field. Like we're not going to hold up for 6 weeks. That's just not going to happen. And so like they have to, there are things that have to happen on both sides. And part of that is us actually going through this process, understanding like what the problems are so that we can eventually be in a happy place, but also, understanding how we can work with them to get the cycle time down to something acceptable for a project that is not like pods, right? Pods should not change rapidly, but we are not a pod API. We are an earlier API.
Yeah. So it seems like an action item would be for us to actually go through the process. And are there people that want to actually do this? But we also, I think we generally agree that it should be non-blocking at this time. I think I generally agree with the idea of doing it earlier to try and get feedback where possible. We had an informal review, not a formal one, which Jordan has documented. So are there people that want to actually follow up on this?
I mean, I definitely want to do them. I think they are valuable. As far as I understand, the action item from our side is to create an issue and tag it. And it's not clear what then happens in terms of the API review. I'm very much against the idea of some backroom thing that happens on any venue other than GitHub or docs of some sort, but GitHub is the one we chose to use. So I am, but if there is more, I am happy to go through that process, but I also think it should be done in public.
Yep, I agree. So an action item is if you're interested in going through the review process and following the procedure and getting us rolling. It looks like Jason Citybud. Please add your deets here, and then we can coordinate that afterwards.
And sorry, just to clarify, we should just do CAPI first, or we should do CAPI and Kappa like together? I don't know.
It's a good question. I don't know that particular one. I do think that they might be better together. Andy, you have your hand raised.
I was going to say probably definitely CAPI, probably the Qvidium Bootstrap data types. Kappa, I think, is a little bit less important than these two, but we could do that as well.
My thought was just, is it possible to review CAPI without an implementation, right?
Yeah, it's probably worth having some review of whether it's a minimal infrastructure provider or a full-blown one to get an idea of how the CAPI types and the Bootstrap types and an infra provider types all fit together.
Yep. Any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns here?
I just wanted to ask about timeline. When do you think this is going to happen, Justin?
We can raise the issue pretty fast, but I think it's I don't know when the Tim's like steering work is going to happen. I don't know when they will clear their backlog or prioritize us.
I think they're two independent things. I think we should do it independently. I think the governance problem is separate from actually doing the review itself. I think we should do a review and be honest about the fact that we're trying to record this for posterity. So that way we have it publicly facing and to see how long it takes, right? Because there's a bunch of sub-projects for SIG cluster lifecycle where we'd want to go through this process, not just cluster API, but it may affect all the downstream providers too as well, possibly. And we want to make sure that we are clear about how long it takes and what the process is, so that way if it's good and it's simple and clean, that we just recommend it and we have a well-defined path forwards for other people. But if it's painful, we need to give that feedback too as well. Any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns? I don't see any more hands raised. Next, we can move up to provider scaffolding repo. Michael.
Yeah, this is mostly just a question. Obviously, we're going to need new infrastructure providers that conform to V1 Alpha 2. Just wondering if any of that is materialized, and do we plan on having like a kind of scaffolding repo that people can merge changes to for common code, or are we doing the vendor model, or has anything materialized in the area? Because there's obviously going to be a lot of shared functionality.
David?
So there are currently two different attempts to tackle this problem. One is the Git book has manual instructions that one must read and then go through, cut and paste code, fix things up manually, and should result in a working provider for V1 Alpha 1. I believe that needs to be updated for V1 Alpha 2. There's also a partial provider inside the repository, the examples directory, I believe. I think that's used for some minor integration tests, but I don't know that it's usable apart from that. There's some other automated mechanisms we've considered copying, but no implementation work's been done. So currently, I think the Git book is the de facto documentation for that. And needs to be up.
It's Vincent and Jason.
I wanted to say, like, so the Docker provider and the Qvidium provider, Qvidium mostly for V1 Alpha 2, is actually going through the scaffolding with QBuilder V2. So whoever's going to work on that, like, it would be great to document the process, like what needs to be changed, so that we can add that. We can first improve QBuilder if there's any issues because it's beta, and second, document the process so that in the Git book, as David mentioned, so that others can follow as well.
Jason?
Yeah, so I'll say the first approach that we took with V1 Alpha 1 was actually an example repository that David had set up. And what we found is that it ended up being quite error prone because people had to find and replace things with different cases and things like that. And we've had less kind of user-related issues with implementation since we moved to the Git book-based approach. So unless things change significantly with V1 Alpha 2, it may be better to stick with the doc first based approach. just to avoid kind of those copy and paste type errors.
So my recommendation, as is always, is typically to log the issue and then hammer out the details there, and then we can, figure out a path forward. With that in mind, Michael, any parting comments there?
Yeah. Sounds like I'll log an issue and we can have more meaningful discussion there. Just curious if this existed yet, and it sounds like it hasn't been explored deeply, at least in the context of V1 Alpha 2. So that sounds good.
Okay. It doesn't look like we have any more agenda items. So I was going to go into, I'll make one last call if there's any last agenda items before we triage the inbound issues or updated issues. Been once, twice, 3 times. All right. So one of the things I want to do before we even did that is address 2 legacy issues to figure out what we're doing with them. So we have 2 PRs, one from March 15th and one from April 17th, that are still hanging open. I do know that the one from March 15th, I believe Vince had commented on. Vince?
Yeah, we're waiting on the person to rebase. I think this is really outdated at this point. And if we need the same for V1 Alpha 1, we should backorder it. I'll ping Jin Chen and see if he can work on it, or we can close it. We can open another one.
So typically what I do for cases where the person, if it's a useful patch and a person has not been responsive, is to modify basically cherry pick their patch into a branch so they have attribution, but then do a modification for whatever the review comments are going forwards if they're non-responsive and it's useful.
Sounds good.
Okay. Next up was this one seemed kind of trivial, but it also just languished.
So this one wasn't quite trivial because we were trying to clean up some of the comments, but in trying to clean them up, it also broke some of the auto generation at the same time. And I don't think we ever worked through those remaining issues.
Does someone want to take this to get through? Go ahead, David.
Oh, no, I liked your question. Okay, so briefly, this is non-trivial. This is difficult because I've spent a couple hours on it, but basically we have Kube Builder annotation code generation, we have GoDoc code generation, and then we have Gitbook code generation. I can only get 2 of the 3 to work at any given time, but I haven't done an exhaustive search. I think the next step is actually to open an issue against the CodeGen utility and fix that, since it's under our control as a community. I can take an action item to update the issue about fixing this, but I don't think it's going to be a fast fix.
Could we split it into things that do work and things that don't work? What was the actual?
What it is Doxygen markers are interpreted by GoDoc incorrectly. And there's a number of different Doxygen markers. Since Doxygen is theoretically language agnostic, there's a number of different ways you can embed the marker in a comment. When you embed it using the C++ style markers, which is triple dash, that is interpreted incorrectly by GoDoc. When you use an alternative mechanism, I think that causes problems for Kube Builder. So.
Okay. If you could update the comment there and log an issue against this, perhaps we can split out portions of modifications. It seems like some of this could be split into changes that could work. I don't see why they shouldn't, but some of them, I don't know. I kind of agree with Justin. I think there's pieces here that I don't see how they could not work. And there are pieces that I think, are the troublesome ones.
You're right. The textual comments can all change. So yeah. I'll do that.
Okay. Updating inbound. So those are the legacy the legacy PRs, and the ones that are kind of inbound within the last week, I'll just let folks deal with. So triaging the new inbound issues. First one up is Fixed Provider Implementation Guide for KubeBuilder 2.0. I think this seems totally legit for this cycle, given the fact that we are switching to KubeBuilder 2.0.
But there's already a tracking issue, 1075, I think, for KubeBuilder.
Yeah, I opened this because I was trying to make a change, and then I found this issue. So it's mostly to keep track of the problems. So you probably can keep track of all the problems, try to solve them. Because here the problem I have is that with the Alpha 1 version, the compilation breaks. So I need to use the Alpha 2 because the way we do things is different. So I don't know what's the order to address this. You know what I mean?
I think leave it open for now because your umbrella issue is lacking. So I think leave it open for now. Mark it as V1 Alpha 2. If Pablo, are you going to help with this, or is it? Are you interested in helping with this?
Yeah. Actually, yeah.
Okay. All right, moving up, cluster cuddle delete, cluster appears to hang with 014. Yeah.
Andrew's working on that. We just need to do the housekeeping to get the labels set up.
Hold on a second. How to handle failed to retrieve kubeconfig secret for cluster.
I'd like to close that one because Jason provided a link to the documentation.
Right. Can you do that then? With the,
Yep.
This is 1109. The kubeconfig secret should be moved as part of the pivot and cluster cuddle. Are folks going to thoughts here?
It's not strictly necessary because the secret will tend to get recreated, but if we pivot it, then it happens quicker than if we don't.
So I think this might be provider specific though. With the AWS provider, we are able to regenerate the secret. I don't know if we can necessarily guarantee that that'll be true for all the other providers as well. But I'll gladly take this and run with it.
Great. Are there any other new issues that folks would like to talk to other than this one needs to be deleted?
You might think you skipped over one, which is like the Node-REF controller panic, 1104.
This is already marked as V1 Alpha 2.
Okay, but I think somebody said they're going to work on it, and they are not. Yeah, Pires said he will work on it.
Yeah, he said he's not in the org, so.
Oh, okay.
The only other one that I wanted to call comments to is that I opened up this issue last week. I mentioned it too as well. If you have thoughts with regards to an operator for managing cross-cluster or cross-providers, please add details there. I'm currently trying to draft up a document for broader review. Are there any other last questions, comments, complaints, concerns? Or do we get 4 minutes back?
Tim, do you want to send an email to the Google group about the operator question to try and get more people to see it?
Not really.
Okay, that's fair.
I kind of feel like this is the repo and the issues are open. Like the typical modus operandi for cluster lifecycle things is that we do everything in issues, log everything in issues, make that be the canonical source of truth. Because sometimes when you open up to the mailing list, you get the drive-by or death by a thousand cuts by drive-bys. So I think if you care about the repository, you're looking at you're watching it, and you're part of those meetings. So. Any other last questions, comments, complaints, concerns? Right. Going once, twice, 3 times. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a happy Wednesday.